Did you know that there are 2 different Veilguard skills and unique armors for every companion, but it is possible to get locked out of some of them? Well, today we're going to cover all the unique armors, Veilguard skills, gifts, and romance for all 7 companions. Let's go! Let me know who your favorite companion is in the comments. I'm going to try very hard not to spoil the companion stories for you guys. I'll blur as much of the text as I can, but I do recommend you don't read any of the dialogue text in this video. I know it's hard, the human eye does like to read, but if you can avoid it, I'll try my best to avoid spoiling those stories for you. And when talking about the decisions that lead to either one Veilguard skill or the other, I'll just refer to either the left option or the right option, which are the options on the dialogue wheel, without actually telling you what that decision is in terms of the story aspects, if that makes sense. All right, let's start with Lace Harding. Harding is a rogue companion that you get at the very start of the game. Her gift, however, doesn't come until much later. You'll need to unlock the Black Emporium vendor, which is located at Docktown. Now, this will unlock just throughout the main story. The caretaker will eventually have a quest for you at the lighthouse. This will lead you directly to the Black Emporium, and then the gift can be found there. For the Veilguard skills here, at the end of Harding's storyline, the left option will lead you to the Inquisition Spotter Legendary Medium Armor. Now, what this does is all destinations are more likely to disrupt affected enemies, and this has a chance of disruptions applied to all enemies near a detonation as well. And the actual Veilguard skill is Heart of the Titan, so Soothing Potions cooldown duration is reduced by 15%, and Harding's detonation damage is increased by 25%. You and your other companion gain bonus 20% damage and 15% cooldown reduction. And the right option leads you to Titan's Vengeance. This gives detonations also apply bleeding. Detonations deal plus 25% physical damage versus enemies that are already bleeding. And the Stone's Vengeance is the Veilguard skill. Harding's weapon attacks are occasionally replaced with Titan Stones, and Titan Stones deal 20% increased damage and now apply bleeding. In terms of these choices, I do believe that the right option, the Titan's Vengeance and the Stone's Vengeance Veilguard skill, is the better overall option. It is a little build dependent, and there's definitely some that are even more build dependent in this, but detonations also applying bleeding plus dealing extra physical damage to targets that already have bleeding is fantastic. And then also the Titan Stones dealing that extra damage and applying bleeding. Like, status effects are so strong in Veilguard, especially bleeding and necrosis, so anytime you can apply that status effect will really do well for you. Before we move on to the next companion, I do want to mention here, if you want to talk about their other skills and just like different synergies, I have a video already about the companions that goes through all of that stuff, and I don't want to rehash that here. I just want to focus on the new things in this video as sort of a companion piece to that one. So moving on to Bellara. Now, Bellara is a mage. She's also a part of the Veil Jumpers, and that's exactly where you get her gift from, the Veil Jumpers vendor in Arlethan Forest. For her Veilguard skill, when you complete her story, the left option gives you the Reborn Leathers. Now, detonations apply shock to all affected enemies, and detonations deal an additional 200 electric damage. And the Veilguard skill, Chain Lightning. Bellara's weapon attacks Chain Lightning against shocked enemies, dealing 100 electricity damage, and the effect of shocks is 10% stronger. And the right option leads you to the Archivist Mail. Now, detonating a sundered enemy detonates another nearby sundered enemy, and enemies near the second detonation become vulnerable to electricity damage. And the Lingering Strike is the Veilguard skill. Bellara's Replenish ability now applies Weakened in a 6-meter radius around you. Whenever Bellara applies Weakened, it also deals 200 electric damage and renders the target shocked. Now, something to note with Bellara here is that once you've completed her story, you won't actually get like that choice that leads you to get the Veilguard skill and the armor immediately after the story completes. She'll actually just be hanging around at the lighthouse one day. Like, you'll just return there, she'll just be chilling, and then you'll be able to make that choice and pick which one, whether it's left or right. So just something to note there. Now, the best option here is tough, as they're both really strong, especially if you are using electric damage and the shocked status effect. I typically tend to lean towards the right option because of the detonation benefits to, say, detonating multiple sundered enemies. Plus, then when you do apply Weakened, it does also apply electric damage and apply them to be shocked as well. So you get those additional benefits. But both of these are quite strong. I typically just seem to lean slightly to the right, but it's entirely up to you. Moving on to Neve, and we're going to talk about Neve and then Lucanis almost together because there is an important decision that will affect what options you get out of this. So starting off with Neve, she is a mage from the Shadow Dragons, and the Shadow Dragon vendor in Docktown is where you get her gift. Now, make sure sure you buy this gift and Lucanis's gift, which we'll talk about next, before you start a Warden's Best Friend quest that leads you to unlock Davrin as a companion. A decision that you make at the end of that quest that you have to make at that time will lock you out of either the Shadow Dragon vendor or the Antivan Crow vendor in Treviso. So you need to make that choice there, and that choice locks you out of one of these Veilguard skills. Another thing to note, if you chose to protect the other city compared to this one and you're locked into that one specific option, you won't get that Veilguard skill like immediately after you complete their quest. You'll actually need to go back and do some quests in that city, and like I think you need to complete like the overall arc of that faction. It seems like, I haven't 100% confirmed that on all of my playthroughs, but it does seem like you need to do that, and then you'll get an event trigger back at the lighthouse that'll give you the Veilguard skill for that specific companion. So speaking of Neve's Veilguard skills, the left option here will lead you to the Threader's plates. Now, enemies remain sundered when detonated, but they can't be detonated again, and sundered effectiveness is increased by 20%. And the skill here is Winter's Wrath. Neve's critical damage is increased by 50%, and Neve's damaging abilities deal bonus 25% damage versus low health, and their cooldown reduction is reduced by 20%. Now, being very careful with spoilers here, when you make that choice at the end of a Warden's Best Friend, if you choose to protect Treviso rather than Docktown, that will lock you into that specific Veilguard skill that we just touched on. If you choose to protect Docktown, you'll then be able to have access to the second Veilguard skill for Neve, which is the Investigator's Robes. Detonation permanently reduces enemies' cold resistance, and detonations apply frozen if the target's cold resistance drops to 0, and the Cold Justice is the Veilguard skill. Maximum chilled stacks increase by 1, and Neve's chilled effectiveness increases by 2%, and her frozen duration increases by 100%. The right option here, the one that we just covered, is the better option here, especially if you're running some sort of cold build or leaning into those status effects. Chilled is a great status effect as it does slow enemies, plus freezing enemies in place stops them from attacking you. So like that's obviously fantastic as well. And being able to freeze enemies with detonations is also fantastic, but it is dependent on that decision you make. Now, speaking of that decision, the Lucanis side is the other side here. Lucanis is a rogue of the Antivan Crows, and the Antivan Crows vendor in Treviso is where you find his gift. Again, depending on that choice that you may get locked out of this vendor, so make sure you've bought the gift as soon as you get to that area and can actually buy it. For the Veilguard skill here, the left choice leads you to Crow's Tenacity. Now, detonations versus knocked down enemies also deal stagger to all enemies, and stagger from detonating is increased by 50% for each enemy hit. And the Veilguard skill, Demon of Defiance, Lucanis's critical damage increases by 50%, and his detonation damage increases by 50%. Lucanis's abilities now do 25% more damage to enemies suffering from an affliction. And if you have chosen to protect Docktown rather than Treviso, you will be locked into that specific choice. However, if you do protect Treviso, you'll get the option for the second Veilguard skill and armor, which is Crow's Poise, one of my favorite looking armor sets in the game. Detonating an overwhelmed enemy detonates another overwhelmed enemy nearby, and enemies near the second detonation become vulnerable to necrotic damage. And the Veilguard skill here is Demon of Rebellion. Your resistance is increased by 10%, and the party's barrier damage is increased by 25%. This is a tough one in terms of which one is better. I like the Crow's Poise armor here better because it does detonate multiple enemies, plus it does apply vulnerability to necrotic damage, which Lucanis does do, and if you have a necrotic build, it's absolutely fantastic. However, Crow's Tenacity is still a solid armor set, but the Demon of Defiance Veilguard skill is significantly better than the Demon of Rebellion because your resistance being increased by 10% just lowers how much damage you take. That's kind of boring. Plus, barrier damage is super easy to clear. It's not that versatile, whereas increasing Lucanis's crit damage, his detonation damage, and the amount of damage his abilities do to enemies applied with an affliction, as pretty much every enemy is going to have an affliction in the game, is just significantly better than Demon of Rebellion. Speaking of a Warden's best friend, Davrin is next. He's a warrior of the Grey Wardens. Now, the Grey Warden vendor in Hossberg Wetlands is where you get his gift. You will need to progress a certain part through the game before that vendor does become available and does sell the gift for you. Now, the two choices here, the left option for the Veilguard skill gives you the Wildwood Benefactor. Detonating staggered enemies deals stagger to all enemies, and stagger from detonating is increased by 10% for each enemy hit. And the Veilguard skill is Battle Master. Asan abilities deal 25% more damage, and when used, Asan abilities gain precision. And the right option here gives you the Grey Benefactor. Detonation damage is now dealt as fire damage and deal 25% more fire damage for each stack of burning on the target. And the skill here is Defender. Asan's abilities have a 25% shorter cooldown duration, and when used, Asan abilities grant Deflect. Now, personally, the right option here is the better armor set, as detonations then now apply fire damage, and there are Darkspawn everywhere in this game, and they are weak to fire. Plus, dealing 25% more fire damage for each stack of burning on the target is perfect if you do have a fire-based build. However, if you do have a stagger-based build, then the left option is probably better for that sort of specific setup. Plus, the Veilguard skill there is a little bit stronger, but generally across the board, the right option is the one I would be picking. Moving on to Taash. She is a warrior of the Lords of Fortune, and the Lords of Fortune vendor is found in the Hall of Valor, which is where you find her gift. The left option for her Veilguard skill gives you all detonations apply burning to all affected enemies, and detonations deal an additional 150% fire damage if the target is already burning. And the Veilguard skill here is Taash's critical damage increases by 50%, with damage versus high health increased by 25%, and Taash's burning now deals 50% more damage on the initial hit and reduces by 10% for each subsequent hit. The right choice gives you an armor set that detonating a weakened enemy detonates another nearby weakened enemy, and the second detonation now applies to all nearby weakened enemies, not just one. And the Veilguard skill Kanari's Focus, Taash's weapon attack damage increased by 50% with a 20% reduction in cooldown duration, and Taash's burning duration increased by 2 seconds. The left option here is the stronger option because of all of that additional fire damage and the burning benefits, especially if you have a fire build. If you don't have a fire-based build, I would lean the right option, especially if you are using Taash to detonate the weakened effect. Like, that is very, very strong, and then you still get some benefits from her burning status effect that she can apply. Last but not least is our Necromancer Emmerich. He is a mage of the Morn Watchers. Now, his gift is found at the Morn Watch vendor in the Necropolis halls. That'll become available to you as soon as you unlock Emmerich. The left option for his Veilguard skill leads you to an armor set that detonations deal plus 50% damage versus health while you are at low health, and detonations grant you invulnerable while you are at low health. And the Veilguard skill Life's Embrace, your low health threshold is now increased by 10%, and the party deals 50% more damage while you have low health. And the right option leads you to an armor set that detonating a sundered enemy applies Quietus, which is his unique status effect that is essentially necrosis, and if detonated, enemies already have necrosis or Quietus deal 200 necrotic damage. And Death's Caress is the Veilguard skill. All of Emmerich's abilities apply necrosis when dealing damage, and the party's affliction damage is increased by 25%. The right option here is significantly stronger here because it does help you apply these status effects, and the party's affliction damage being increased by 25% is fantastic, especially for necrotic builds here. It's very, very strong. Even if you're using, say, a burning or a shock build, whatever it is, anything that's applying afflictions, that extra damage of just a flat 25% is fantastic. There is a couple of builds where the left option is good, like those low health thresholds. There's a couple of like low health builds that would benefit from that, but for the most part, the right option is the better option here. The last thing I want to touch on today is how to romance a companion. Now, essentially just flirting with them when the option appears will lead you down that like initial romantic path. Now, you'll get a quest at some point where the companion will be needing to make a choice, and if you've been quite flirtatious with them, there will be an option there to commit to a romance with that companion, and then you'll essentially be committed to that companion. Something to note here is that once you've entered a relationship with one companion, you'll lose all the flirt options and the romance options with all the other companions. You'll just be committed to that one. Now, during the final act of the game, like after the point of no return, there is a spicy scene with that companion that you have chosen. You'll be able to get that once you do return to your room at one point. You'll get a nice little spicy scene, and then you'll progress towards the end of the game. But that is essentially how you romance your companion. It's quite simple to do. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Who is your favorite companion in Dragon Age The Veilguard? Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.